Hey Wes,
Hey,
how you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm doing good. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so excited for this conversation. Thank you for being part of it.
Thank you for inviting me in to have this conversation. I'm super happy to be here too.
Yes, yes. So, as we wait on folks to just kind of trickle in and join us, I usually like to start by just giving a little bit of background about the purpose of this series. So, at Co-Created, one of our big purposes is being a resource to schools that gives them enough information about training and development and continuing education for teachers. So we've got a marketplace where, of course, providers like you are offering your amazing training service. Teachers are giving ratings and reviews about their experiences with various trainings. They are creating profiles that show their training history. And kind of just within that whole ecosystem, I thought that these interviews would be a great addition just to give people this like face-to-face conversation time with each of you so that you get that human side, right? And they get to see what you have to say about your own work and go a little bit more in depth. So I'm excited for this opportunity to showcase the work that you're doing and give schools that extra information about your awesome trainings.
Thank you so much, Jen. Yeah, I love what you've created with co-created.
Thank you. I love that you're a part of it. So I am ready to dive into questions if you are. What do you say?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Perfect. Well, I really love to just start by laying the groundwork, getting into the basics, and just hearing a little bit about your background. So, you didn't come into this work from nowhere. It came from somewhere and likely from a personal experience or, part of your identity clearly with the kind of work you're doing. So, can you talk to us a little about your background and what got you into the work that you're doing now?
Yeah. Okay. So for those who don't know, the work I'm doing now is that I'm a transgender educator and speech therapist. And so I do a lot of work with schools and school districts and educators and help them better understand gender diversity. And we work together and we collaborate to create school and classroom communities where people of all gender identities, all gender expressions, all sexual orientations, they all know that they belong, that they're valued, and even celebrated for who they are. And
Yes.
the way I got here was through kind of a mix of personal experience, lived experience, and the professional career I was on. What I mean by that is I am a transgender person. And through that lived experience, when I was in graduate school to be a speech language pathologist, I started doing some really small educational pieces around what does it mean to be trans. There's a lot of misunderstanding or just unknowing about what that even means. And so I started doing a little bit of education here and there and received really positive feedback. I felt that it was a really gratifying experience. And slowly, more and more speech therapists and then teachers and principals and educators and people from other organizations started reaching out to me and wanting to collaborate on how we can show up better for people of all gender identities and for everyone within the LGBTQ plus community.
Great. And I know that some of your background is as a speech and language pathologist too.
That's right. I graduated with my master's in speech language pathology back in 2016. And that career kind of took off at the same time that this consulting career took off for me. I was doing them side by side for a long time. I worked in the public education system as a speech therapist for a long time. I also worked in public education prior to grad school as a paraprofessional for a long time. I've always kind of seen myself as landing in the education world in some capacity. And so now I get to reach a larger audience. Like when COVID happened, I was able to reach people from across the country and even in other countries sometimes
Wow.
who I wasn't previously reaching. I was really local prior to that. And I guess little silver lining of everything that has happened is that I've been able to get into conversation and dialogue and support people, educators who are then in turn supporting youth and students to help my experiences reach further out, which has been
Sure.
really unexpected and wonderful.
I love to hear that. Yeah, it's always about the impact, right? And that's the beauty of education. Like I will shout it from every rooftop. Education is how we change the world. It's how. And so the way that you're able now to work with educators and have that just ripple effect in students' lives and the people they grow up to be, what an amazing impact. So I'm glad that you found your way into education. Education's always been my background. So really glad that you're a part of that world and making that bigger impact now. So, as we're thinking about the education space and schools working with you and hopefully bringing you in for workshops and trainings and helping teachers do a better job, like you said, supporting our LGBTQ plus students, what are some ways that schools can cultivate a safe space for students of all identities? I love even how you use the word gender diversity. What are some ways that schools can make that effort and make the schools a safe place for these students?
Yeah, and I love that you pointed that out, like this language of all gender identities and gender diversity. And although this came to be because LGBTQ people have been discriminated against for so long, and
Yes.
there are specific struggles there that need to be addressed, really the work that I'm doing and the way that we are able to create these affirming spaces is not just about the LGBTQ youth. It's really about all of our youth. It's about
Yes.
everybody, because when I say gender diversity, I'm not just talking about trans people and non-binary people. I'm talking about everybody, because we are diverse humans. We are diverse people with diverse genders. Everybody has a gender of some sort. And so that is the diversity. It's not only diverse when we are different from the norm. Like, that's not diversity. We are all diverse. And so I think first and foremost really is not to just like plug my services, but it's so important that staff are trained, because
Yes.
we need people to be understanding, what does it even mean to be an LGBTQ youth? What does gender even mean? What are these things? How does it relate? What's my own personal experience of it as the educator? How is that showing
Right.
up in my classroom and my teaching? And so it's so beneficial to get people trained. But beyond that, I think that it's equally as important that we're focusing on just like taking a breath and remembering that we're just talking about helping people thrive and be themselves and connect with others and be successful participants in society and in the communities that they're in. Maybe trying to strip a little bit of the politics that have gotten into all of this, and remembering that we're just people. So
Yes.
if you can connect, if you can listen, if you can advocate for having policies in place that make sure that there's consistency in how your school or district is responding to any sort of bullying or anti-LGBTQ rhetoric, finding ways to signal your allyship is really huge. And that can look so many different ways, and giving students access to different types of representation. Like, all of these things play a really big role in ultimately improving people's quality of life and, quite frankly, like, ability to keep living.
Mm, yes. And we are going to circle back on that extremely important part in just a few minutes. I wonder if, I love that you brought us back to these building blocks. Like, it's the bare basics about when we start working with students and starting to make our schools safer spaces, the work starts with self, right? It's this inside out process of us knowing our own identities and getting familiar with our own like vocabulary words so that we can work effectively with students, because we started that work ourselves first. It doesn't start like, well, I'm just going to dive in head first with the kids. No, I'm going to work on myself. I'm going to practice with my fellow adults in the building. And then we're going to use this new skill set and use that in the classroom. So thank you for that important reminder about where the work starts.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So also, and just the reminder that this is human work. Like, this is a human thing. And from one person to another, I love learning from a person's story. And if you're comfortable, Wes, just telling us a little bit about your story just as a person that have now shaped how you help educators work in schools based on who you were and what you experienced as a student. Is there any part of that you'd feel comfortable sharing with us today?
Yeah, I feel comfortable sharing a lot. You know, I'm a relatively open book when it comes to talking about my trans experience.
Thank you. I just know that any person's story is a gift. So I want you to know I'm receiving it as a gift and I appreciate it.
Thank you. I feel the exact same way. I love learning from people's lived experience and stories.
Yes.
And it's part of what I bring into my work as well. I'm not just here as like an expert on queer and transness. I don't know all the things. I don't have all the answers, but I am dialed in to my community and research, and I have my experience. I learned that I was trans in my early to mid 20s. When I was growing up, I had no exposure to really any LGBTQ people. Maybe I saw the occasional person on some show where it was like in a negative light. I certainly heard negative comments about being gay when I was in school. When I was in high school, there were 0 people at my school who were out as LGBTQ, but there were some people who were bullied for being perceived as gay.
Right.
So to give context, I guess, I grew up in Southern California. I graduated high school in 2004. So that's kind of my time frame and era in which I was growing up. And it wasn't until college that I really started understanding first my sexuality, and that I am physically and romantically attracted to women. That was my first entry point into being part of the LGBTQ community, was kind of recognizing, oh, like my life is not trajecting in the ways I was taught it was supposed to. And I guess that kind of circles back a little bit to things that happen in school. And even though it's not necessarily explicit, it kind of is, because there wasn't any other representation. Like all
Right.
I'm hearing are that girls grow up to become women and marry men, and vice versa. And there's really just these 2 binary options. There's
Right.
one way of being, and anything else is like really undesirable. And for me, it's really interesting. When I reflect back on my journey, it was like every time that I moved to a new location, especially when I was moving by myself, it's almost like I subconsciously granted myself permission to get to know myself better. So, you know, the first time I recognized my sexuality was when I went off to college. And then later on, when I moved to another city after college, is when I started to be able to explore my gender.
Yes.
And I think there's something really there to this. Kids are really picking up on the messages they're receiving, whether they're implicit or explicit. And so I had just internalized all of this information. Like, I'm supposed to be this certain way. I'm supposed to dress a certain way. I'm supposed to act a certain way. I'm supposed to talk a certain way. I'm supposed to like certain things.
All the supposed tos.
All the gender stereotypes and gender roles. And there's nothing wrong with those desires and expressions existing, but for them to be the only things that kids are exposed to. And like we mentioned earlier, we live in a gender diverse world. We are diverse humans. People have different desires and wants. And so for there just to be this narrow view of who you can be, like, I think that is kind of what I wish was different in my education.
Yeah, totally. Thank you so much for sharing that. And my teacher ear couldn't help but pick up on you noticing the lack of representation at school, not just among your peers, but I'm sure in books, posters, media, materials. Like, there are so many ways as educators that we can create more gender inclusive environments by, you know, I always use the term windows and mirrors. We want students to see reflections of themselves and windows beyond themselves, right? And so if there's not a lot of diversity within a setting, teachers can bring in learning materials that do create some opportunities for students to see something different, so that there isn't just one way to be, one person to be like, you know? So that stood out for me.
Absolutely. And I love the mirrors and windows thing, because there are some mindsets right now that are essentially viewing
Right.
representation as like trying to teach kids to be a certain way when
Mhm.
it's really, it's the opposite of that. Like for me, it was about, I needed access to those mirrors, right? I needed access to see someone that was like me and what I was experiencing internally that I didn't have access to. But for other people, that's only going to be true if that's your identity and that's who you are. It's not going to change you into that.
Right.
But what other people need and what I needed about other people who are different from me are those windows. Like we need windows into to just learning about who other people are, how other people live in the world and operate. And that's how we're going to raise children and youth that are successful adults and able to effectively communicate with people in their lives, effectively be in their jobs and in their communities as they get
Yes.
older, because we're going to be giving them the tools to be better equipped to be respecting and valuing people's experiences who are different from their own.
That's right. And hopefully this conversation is yet another window and mirror for some folks, right? Like that we're talking about our experiences and you're sharing with us your story. We need more conversations like this going on, right? Not less. And so I'm just grateful you're here today. I'm thinking more too about your work within schools and, if you're pushing into school, offering a workshop with teachers, just shifting gears a little bit into that training space and what a school leader might expect in booking a package with you. Could you talk to us about some of the workshops you offer and what can someone expect when they are working with you in that setting? And what can a school leader expect when they are partnering with you in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. I really try to tailor all of my work with schools and districts to the specific needs that they are facing. So
Yes.
I don't have any sort of cookie cutter workshops. Everything that I put together is designed based on conversations that I have with school leadership or whoever it is that I'm working with to help bring this workshop together. Sometimes it's a one-off workshop, many times it's a mini series, or even sometimes a longer term series of workshops. And what we do is we come together and have a conversation about what's going on right now. What are you noticing? Where are people currently in terms of their learning curve on the topic of queer and trans people? What has been coming up in your school with your students, with the families? What's going on? And from there, I design a package or a workshop that really gets at the things that are going to be most impactful for them.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So it's really grounded in listening. Like what I keep getting from you is listening, listening, listening. You're going to go in, you're going to truly be a partner, or of course, my favorite word, a co-creator, and build with them about whatever their situation is in their environment and be really responsive to those needs. So it all is grounded in listening.
That's exactly right. I think,
Yeah.
how can I preach about listening to marginalized and minoritized communities and then not do that in return in terms of listening to what people are needing who maybe aren't understanding or who are there but really want to make sure there's consistency. That listening piece is really, really big for me in terms of the prep work
Yes.
and also in the workshop as well.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
So not only can they expect a lot of that up front and getting prepared for, but they can expect a lot of that in the work itself when they're in the workshop or whatever the case may be.
exactly. Yeah. And my style is interactive.
Yes.
There's absolutely a piece of information sharing, what some people might think of as like lecture style, but I always am really welcoming in dialogue and deep understanding and little activities spread throughout.
Great. And then what about after? What can people expect after they've done a workshop with you? How do we move forward afterwards, right?
It really varies a lot. So, again, this is something based off of their needs and realistically also off of budget. So, ideally, I love to do follow up. Like sometimes I'll do like a half day workshop with a group, and then maybe a month or two later, I'll come back and do just a 1 or 2 hour follow up where it's
Gotcha.
like we dove into this work together for half a day or even a day. You know, we like got in there, we did it. People are, especially if you're new at learning all of this, you're taking in a lot and you're
Sure.
sitting with it, you're processing, you're going back. I hear all the time people feeling like I provide them with tools for them to start trying out and playing with the very next day. And so they go and they do that.
I love
And
that.
they see how that feels and they see how their students respond and they come up with more questions or just reflection. And so it's so cool when we have the opportunity to come back together again for like a shorter period of time. And sometimes the most powerful ones that I've had of those have just been where it's like open for conversation, like the whole
Yes.
thing. There's no lecture piece of that follow up. It's just us getting into it and exploring, because like we talked about earlier a little bit, there's so much power in the self-reflection piece, and it's so necessary.
So
In
necessary.
you got to be able to start exploring these aspects of yourself and how your experience impacts the way you show up in the world. And that takes time to process and to learn and to unfold. You know, I came out as trans maybe, I've lost track of how long, I think like 11 or 12 years ago. And I'm still learning things
Yeah.
all the time. It's a process. And so it's really cool after the fact when we have the opportunity to get back together as a group. Sometimes it looks more like a feedback survey or a phone call or a Zoom with a smaller group. But my favorite is when we all get to come back together
Yes.
at least one more time. It becomes like a series.
Yes. I love what you're describing. As a school leader, when I was a school leader, like that would be what I would want, is this opportunity to take it in, go do something with it, and then come back and talk about what happened. We often call that an action learning cycle or an action research cycle or a grow, measure, learn cycle. We have all these words for it, but it's really like learn a thing, go try the thing, come back and reflect about the thing. That is powerful learning. So I love hearing that your participants get to engage in the work in that flow.
Yeah,
that's awesome. That's good stuff. And I'm thinking about some questions that teachers might ask in your sessions, and some stuff that's coming to mind for me that I just imagine a teacher might be wondering is, I bet they're asking things around pronouns and student pronouns. Does that come up in the work sometimes?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
Pronouns.
help us out. Like, what are your tips for teachers about where do we start? You know, imagining a teacher has just come to realize pronouns are a thing we should be self-identifying. Where do they start and what do they do if they mess it up?
Yeah. So this is so great. I love that you brought this up. I've had many people come to me after being in a workshop with me, educators come back to me and say, after our workshop together, I learned and realized and really felt the importance of sharing my pronouns. And so I went back the next day. I started sharing my pronouns with my students. And I have students who I've been using the wrong pronouns with all this time. I had students, by me sharing my pronouns, it opened up this door, it opened up this invitation for them to feel safe, for them to share who their true identity is with me. And now I'm able to use the right words about them.
Oh my gosh.
That is so powerful and so important. And so if you can do the learning as to why it's so important to share your pronouns, you're going to see incredible results in terms of more students are going to feel like they belong, which is ultimately
Yes.
what it's about. And
It just opens that door.
yeah, it really does. And to circle back to like the messing up piece, I think that that is equally as important to be talking about, because I know teachers, educators, like, we want to get it right.
We want to get it right.
We want to get it right. We don't want to cause harm. We don't want to do something wrong. We don't want to do something that feels icky. Like, we want to get it right. And so it's scary to be like, I don't fully know. I don't fully get this. And so it can be easier to just not do the thing instead of putting yourself out there and messing up and getting it wrong. And what I want to say to that is, first of all, like, your students are always messing up. They're kids. They're learning all the time.
Yes.
They're constantly getting corrected. And how cool is it to be able to model what that looks like as an adult? We don't always get things right, you know, it's totally okay. And I think that the best way to go about, like, when you mess up someone's pronouns, for example, if you realize it yourself, just self-correct, like say the wrong word and then say the right word and keep going, and make an intentional effort to then keep incorporating their correct pronouns throughout whatever you're saying in that moment, so that A, you're practicing, B, whoever's around you is hearing that
Modeling.
model.
Mm.
And if someone corrects you, we want to sometimes just go into this like big apology because we feel bad. We want to do right. We don't want to do wrong.
Right.
But I really like to guide people towards more of like a gratitude approach, like saying thank you and then demonstrating that you heard them by using the right words immediately afterwards. Because if you're being like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, especially if it's to the person whose pronouns were used incorrectly, it places it on them, and it puts them in this position to like comfort you almost and like say, it's okay.
Yes.
Like, you know, but we don't need to go there. Like, that's not really what it's about. What it's about is us seeing them feeling seen by us, and being able to demonstrate that we can hear that. We can say, oh, thank you for letting me know, or thank you for reminding me, and then practice and use the right words.
So remembering the word thank you. Oh, thanks for letting me know. Correct it in the moment, keep it moving. I'm glad you brought up the over apologizing piece. We talk about that a lot in various diversity, equity, inclusion work, is like anytime we're diving into this kind of work that is sensitive in nature, it just is, we're also human and we're gonna mess it up. And so we have to just own it, keep it moving. And when you over apologize, it makes it about the apologizer and not the person who felt the harm. And so thanks for calling that out, that over apologizing piece, because it's easy to do, right? It's easy to like, oh God, I feel bad. Now just I start saying all the things.
Yeah, it comes from such a good and genuine place, but
yes.
just retrain yourself to shift that in a different way, because that's where intention versus impact really comes into play. And I also wanted to mention, like, I think there tends to be all of this wanting to apologize because there's some sort of shame that a person's experiencing if they're really wanting to do it right, but they're not. There's like this shame piece. And I just want to give people permission to lift that shame. It doesn't need to be a shameful experience to misgender someone when you pair it with this recommitment to getting it right and showing that through your actions.
That recommitment. I love that. And Wes, I know that we're just a little over time, but I do have one last teachery question that I'm thinking about. Can I run that one by you?
Of course, yeah.
So I'm imagining, again, when teachers are working with you in your workshops and whatnot, we talked about the pronoun thing coming up. Another one I imagine might be on teachers' minds is about timing, especially our teachers of younger learners. They might be wondering, when is the right time to talk about gender identity or sexual orientation? Is there a such thing as too soon, too early? And how do we make it developmentally appropriate to have these conversations?
Yeah, so I think when people are wondering this and asking this question, there's a missed opportunity to recognize that we're already talking with babies, toddlers, everybody about gender and sexual orientation, because we're sharing who their mom and dad are, if they have a mom and dad. We're making comments about flirting with the quote unquote opposite gender. There's so much information that is being fed to children about gender, and you're going to grow up and marry. So, you know, that is there from the beginning. So basically the right time is like anytime, all the time, from as little bitty, because it's already happening, but it's happening in a really binary way. And it's happening in what we were talking about, that really narrow focused way. And so what we need to be doing is just expanding that representation. And again, it doesn't need to be like explicitly like gender identity is this, and, you know, sexual orientation is this. Like, that's not necessarily always appropriate language for little kids, but being able to break down gender stereotypes when a kid makes a comment about something only girls can do or something only boys can do, or the way girls can dress or boys can have their hair, like any of these things present this opportunity, this teaching moment where we can let them know that, oh, anyone of any gender can like having their nails painted. It doesn't really mean anything about their gender or who they like. It just means that they like having colorful nails, you know? Like there are these opportunities to just kind of normalize the experience of separating out that girl equals this and boy equals this.
Right. Right. Yeah, I appreciate that. I've learned so much from you and the content you put out on social media. Like that's another place I would direct teachers that I've learned from you. You've made videos before using children's books, for example. And, you know, we call these teachable moments. Like these teachable moments are going to come up because kids just say what they're going to say. And then we've got an opportunity to have a conversation just born from the moment and just taking advantage of those moments and running with them and not being afraid to.
Absolutely. Yeah. I just did a post recently about the age-old question kids ask, like, is that a boy or a girl? So people can go check that out. I have lots of resources on this topic. Yeah.
Yes, you do. You really do. I would highly encourage people to follow along on your social media. And that's probably a good place for us to wrap up too. Where else can folks learn from you, and how can schools get in touch with you if they do want to book a workshop? I mean, one thing I'm taking away from today too is a school, yes, they can book you in a responsive way, like a situation has come up at school and they need to be responsive, and you're a great person to partner with in coming up with a plan and educating the staff. Also, it doesn't have to be responsive. It can totally be proactive. And so just encouraging school leaders, don't wait till it's too late. Don't wait till harm is done. You can absolutely be doing this work proactively. So all that to say, if a school wants to bring you in, talk to us about how they can stay in touch, follow along with your work. How can teachers continue learning from you? All of that good stuff.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. So I'm most active in terms of social. I'm most active on Instagram, and that is at hey_Wes_. And my website is hey-wes.com. That's a great way to get in touch with me. You also can directly email me, wes@hey-wes.com. All of my links are on my Instagram. Also, my contact info is on the CreatED platform. So there's lots of ways to get in touch.
Perfect. Well, I will make sure that this video finds its way onto your company profile on our CreatED platform so folks can watch it there. Sounds like you've got lots of ways folks can get in touch with you directly, and we will just continue elevating this work however we can. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for the impact you're making, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you
a
lot.
Appreciate it. All right. Thanks, everybody.